Who are you?
Hi, okay.
That's my famous question.
Who am I? My name's Catherine Heller, and I'm a technical evangelist on the platform evangelism team.
Okay.
And I am focusing on Visual Studio tools for Office in Whidbey.
Okay. And, wow. And you're really a C++ developer.
My background is, I started the Win16 SDK, went through the whole thing of MFCs, ATLs, COM, C++ until .NET.
Wow.
And then jumped on the bandwagon of C#. And so
you know Windows probably at a pretty deep level, right?
I did. I don't know how much of that, you know, it's
Do
when
you forget it? Does it go
well,
away?
you always know there's that WinProc under the covers, right? And it's not that it's on first level, but
Right. And today, why are we here?
well,
This is your office, right?
this is my office, and I wanted to, for those people in the field who will do presentations on VSTO, I just wanted to show you what I think are some of the really cool aspects of VSTO that I find very exciting as a Visual Studio developer.
Very cool. So, what's cool about Office? Can Office be cool for a developer?
Well, I don't want to, I mean, there are a lot of Office developers out there who spend a lot of time developing solutions for Office. I think a lot of the reason that I was never been attracted to Office development is the fact that from a C++ perspective, so Office development has been around for a long time, programming against the automation models was very painful in C++, whereas from Visual Basic it was much easier, much more natural, and so you didn't have to think, there was not so much stuff you had to do just to get up and running. So what I think is great about Office is that it's such a widely used platform. I mean, there are 400 million users of Office out there. That's a huge number of people who spend large parts of their day in Office. You know, how much time do you spend in Outlook?
13 hours a day, probably. You know.
And Word, people are building. They're authoring all sorts of very important business documents and spreadsheets. There are analysts who live in Excel.
Oh yeah.
I mean, their view to the world is through Excel.
Yeah.
And so I think that being able to extend those and build those and use those applications as a front end to your business applications is pretty cool.
What are the three things that maybe an evangelist needs to know about VSTO?
Well, I think first thing about VSTO is managed code development, so it's .NET. And that is, from a Visual Studio developer perspective, that's really a great thing, because in the past, if you've wanted to do Office development, and in some models, like the document-centric model, where you're running tightly integrated with the document, your only tool was VBA. And that required you to use Visual Basic as a programming language, and it required you to use the Visual Basic editor that's inside the Office applications. As a professional developer, you probably want things like integrated debugging. You want to be able to step through your code and step into middle-tier components. You probably want to do things like integrate have your source code saved in source code control systems. Those things are not very, the VB editor is not a tool that's targeted at that type of developer. Whereas Visual Studio is a very productive tool for a professional developer.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then don't forget the .NET framework. So once you're in .NET, it's managed code. It's access to all your favorite namespaces and collections and generics and languages. So I mean that's pretty cool.
Right. And so if you were talking to a team, at a corporation, what would be the highlights? What would you say is the coolest thing about Visual Studio tools for Office? What are the takeaways that you want them to remember? The three things, maybe.
Well, Visual Studio Visual Studio tools for Office brings Visual Studio and Office together. It really makes them the better together type of the synergy that you get between the two. So you have the tools targeted at the professional developer, and yet you're providing your users with the productivity and the knowledge they already have about those familiar applications. So it's really productivity. That seems to be a common theme across our tools as well, right? And in this case, productivity for the developer. You don't have to rewrite things like formatting, implement spell checking, implement how to do calculations or charting. And for the end user, you have access to all of that integrated with your business data, and you don't have to be doing all that manual cut and paste between line of business applications and documents.
Can you give us an idea of what we can do with this thing?
Well, what I'd like to do is more than show you what you can do with it, because then we get into what can you do with Word and Excel. I want to show you how VSTO leverages what you know as a Visual Studio developer to make this very, very easy.
Okay.
That's what I want to focus on. So what I have here, this is Visual Studio 2005. Specifically, this is the Visual Studio Team System Edition.
Okay.
And it's Beta 2.
Beta 2.
Yep.
Yay.
Beta 2, right. Hot off the
Just
press.
shipped.
That's right. So
Only 10 days old, right?
That's right. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a project, and as a Visual Studio project, so I'm going to just go in and create, file new project.
Yeah.
And here we have, the standard project, new project dialog. Now I have my profile set here as a C# developer.
Okay.
Now if you had the general settings or VB, you might see some different order here in the project types. But you have, you still have access down here to other languages.
Right.
So under the language, you'll see that there's an Office node.
Yeah.
Okay. And that Office node is new here, so we'll select the Office node, and here on the right are the 4 project templates that VSTO provides.
Okay.
And the big news there is that we haven't yet announced it yet, but there will be a 5th project template here when VSTO ships, and there will be one for Outlook add-ins as well.
Finally.
Yes, finally. Everybody wants Outlook development,
Absolutely.
so it will be there too.
Yep.
So what we do here, we're just going to select something like I'm going to use an Excel workbook and just create a new project.
Great.
And we have an extra step here where VSTO allows us to create a solution based on an existing workbook if we had it. If I had an existing workbook that had some formatting, maybe some formulas, some layout, I could build my VSTO project from that template, or a document in the case of Word. I'm just going to use a blank spreadsheet for this project. So we're going to create the project here. And what you're seeing here is one of the new features in VSTO 2005. This is Excel hosted inside Visual Studio. So this isn't something that just looks like Excel or simulating Excel, but it's Excel, the full functionality of Excel through Ole Doc Object Hosting. So if you look here, these menus, for example, the Format menu, the Insert menu, these are standard Excel menus through menu merging. And if you look at something like the Tools menu, which exists in both Visual Studio and Excel, notice that the Excel menu items are separated in their own cascading menu. So, together, but separate. Right?
Very interesting. Okay.
Now, so one of the advantages of having Excel as a designer in Visual Studio is that with design surfaces, we can drag and drop components from the toolbox onto the design surface, and then have our designer do something interesting like generate a bunch of code for us. So it's the same idea with Excel. So we're going to go here to our toolbox, and notice what we have here. These are Windows Forms controls.
Yeah.
So now I can take something like a date time picker, which is a standard WinForms controls, and I can just drag that onto the surface of an Excel spreadsheet.
Oh, that's
It's
cool.
pretty cool.
Very cool.
Or what about a button? It's kind of painful in Excel if you want to or in an Office, if you want to create a button, you have to go through the Visual Basic Project system, you have to go into design mode, and create. And then if you want to code against it, like in VSTO 2003, you have to find that control and hook it up, and hook up your events manually. Whereas with this, I'm just going to take a standard WinForms button, and I'm just going to drag it onto the surface of the spreadsheet.
Very cool.
That's all we have to do.
Now, I'll ask a weird question. Could you integrate Avalon into this?
Now, in theory, so one of the Windows Forms team is looking on how to integrate Avalon controls in Windows Forms. So in theory, all of the work that they're doing could easily be applied to VSTO. I think we still need to be a little cautious to see how things evolve and how, if there are if there's any conflicts for running inside Office. But I know that the Trinity product team is looking at this and very interested in providing that support.
Yeah, I can totally see where those transparent charting
Yep.
and other things could go.
Very much so.
The future is bright, I guess.
Yes. So the cool thing is now that I have this on my design surface, again, how do I hook up an event? I just double click on my button. Double click, and there's my event handler.
I can handle that.
Yeah. So I'm going to use, again, hello world type style programming here. I'm just going to do a message box show. And actually what I'm going to show here on the click event is I'm going to take the contents that was selected in that date time picker, and I'm just going to show that as in a message box. So now one of the things I want you to notice here is when I use this reference, I'm going to go, here you'll see my date time picker. And that's because the designer has generated the code that creates an instance of the date time picker as a field of my sheet class. So I can just use that directly. Let's see here, and I'm going to use the value property, and we'll call the too long date string method. And there you have it. And so how do you run a Visual Studio project? You hit F5 typically, we'll build your project and run it in the debugger. So we'll build our project, and there we have it. We're running Excel in the debugger. So I can hit breakpoints, I can step through my code, just like any other Visual Studio project. And if we look at our date time picker here we have all of the great UI. We can pick a date here, and just press our button, and there we have the date that we selected.
All that for one line of code.
One
huh?
line of code. And nothing new there. As a Visual Studio developer, there was no new concept I had to learn to do that. Visually discover on the toolbox, drag onto my design surface, double-click to hook up my event handlers, and call standard .NET Framework classes and methods.
Right.
Nothing new. So now I do want to show you something that is a little bit new, and that's this idea of host controls. So Visual Studio Tools for Office has a concept that's called host controls, which are standard. They're intrinsic objects in the Word and Excel object models that have been extended to behave much more like .NET controls. And so they have things like what we'll see here is if we go to our toolbox, I'm going to open the Excel controls section. So one of the things is that these host controls typically are visually discoverable on the toolbox. So if I'm not an Excel developer, I may not know that there's something called a list box that I can program against. Or I may not know that there's a named range that I can program against. So all I have to do is come here and I see them on the toolbox. And when I see them, and I just drag them onto the surface of my spreadsheet. So there's our named range, and we'll drag on a list object as well. Let's put those on the right. And how do I program against them? Again, we're applying very familiar Visual Studio programming paradigms here to these Office objects. So, for example, the named range, which you'll see it up here in the text box in Excel, to hook up an event handler, I just double-click on the range, and there's my default event handler as well. Now, here's an example of another thing that is common in some of these host controls, is the fact that VSTO has extended them to provide additional events. There is no change event in the native range control in Excel.
Right.
So if I wanted to determine that a specific cell had been changed, I'd have to handle the sheet change event, and I'd have to figure out if the cell that I'm interested in was the one that was changed. Here I have a single event that I can handle for that specific named range.
Okay.
So again, here what I'm going to do is I'm going to call message box. Again, this is a .NET Framework class. Nothing new here.
Could you just turn your screen a little bit?
Yeah.
Your screen's a little
Sure.
directional.
Okay, and I'm going to go through this reference, and here you'll see the named range has been created as a field of my sheet. Typically in Office development, you'll have to go through the collections and find what you need to be able to program against it, but we have a direct programmatic access to it here because it's been generated as a field of our sheet. So we're going to call the value 2 property here, and then go to string, and this will display a message box anytime the contents of this cell changes, and it will show us the new value. Now I want to show you another thing that's very interesting about the host controls is that they provide support for things that you expect from Visual Studio Controls. So for example, let's go here and view the Properties Explorer over here. So notice that we have access to the attributes or the properties of this control from the Properties Explorer. That's also something we expect from .NET controls, and this is something that's being provided by VSTO for these host controls. Now notice here that there is a, let's go here, what are these guys? There's a data source property. That's something that's being provided by VSTO. Again, the underlying native list object does not have a data source or know about data binding. So this is one of the ways in which those controls have been extended to provide things like data binding. So I'm going to show you here, we're going to go in, and this is the standard data source wizard that's new in Visual Studio 2005. So again, this is nothing new that's particular to Office development. We're going to select a database, and I'm just going to use the standard Northwind connection here, and we'll save the we're going to save the connection string.
Sorry. Yeah. Oh, just right there.
Okay.
Sorry, we're back online.
Okay. So anyway,
Turn off the cell phone.
Okay. We're going to go through the wizard. We're going to continue through the wizard, and it's asking us if we want to save our connection string to a config file. So we'll do that. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select from a view. I'm just going to select a couple of the fields. So we'll select a product name and a units in stock and a category name. And so this is going out, it's creating a bunch of code to create our data sources, to create our data connections and table adapters and a binding source. And so what we have here is that you'll see that it's gone out and dimensioned set the columns to match what I chose in my data source. Now there's a new property in beta 2, which is really cool as well. So when I come here to this, let me expand this a little bit. The data bound format settings. There is an additional option I can set for width. Watch this.
Ooh.
And now what happens is, if I set that width property as well, the widths of the columns will be automatically resized based on the data that I put into the list object.
Okay.
So I don't have to worry about that at all in my code. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hit F5, and I haven't written any line of any code for that list object. And watch this.
Oh.
There we go. We just did that query to our data source, went out, accessed the database, brought it in, resized my columns for me, and brought it into my list object.
That's awesome.
And now, one of the really cool things about the list object, the list object is new in Excel 2003, and I love this object even from an end user perspective. I use every spreadsheet I write starts with a list object. And the reason I like it is because it has some very, very cool out-of-the-box functionality. First of all, notice that there's this nice little blue border that redimensions itself automatically. And we get automatic filtering and sorting from anything that we put into the list object. So if I click on one of the headers, note here that I can filter on any one of the values in that column. So we can filter on, just show us the items that have beverages. I can also sort, so I can go to another column and say, you know what, let's sort ascending. And I can also add totals. So if I, as an end user, want to come in here and I can say total row.
What did you do there?
I went to the list menu and selected the total row.
Got it.
Okay, because it's a toggle. And by default, it will take the rightmost column and set that to be the count or number of items, count property. I could change this. And I can also add here, I want to say I want this to be the sum.
Okay.
And I can set these properties programmatically as well. So if I wanted to set those at design time or through code, I could do that as well. In this case, the user, as an end user, I can come in and do that. And so what's really interesting here is if I come here and change my filter, my sums and my totals, they automatically update. So it's pretty cool. I get all of that feature just by putting data into a list object in Excel. And I did that without writing a single line of code. And the interesting thing is I always am a little wary of things that are just drag and drop, because a lot of times when you want to have a little more control, you need to write the code that sometimes you don't know at design time. And the good news is the long way to do this is that the code I need to set a binding source to this list object is a single line of code. I just have to call the set data binding method. So again, I can do this very reasonably, programmatically as well, apart from doing it through the RAD design method.
Now, where could you show off your C++ skills?
Not.
Could you put Flight Simulator in a cell?
Yeah, I don't know that I would. Probably my C++ skills would be a little rusty at this stage. C#, but I can apply my C# skills in the fact that I'm writing C# code. Okay. I don't have to write. And if you're a VB developer, you can use VB, and you can if you're an Office developer and you've spent a lot of time and have a lot of understanding of the object models, you can still continue. You can certainly make use of that knowledge writing these types of applications. So. So I showed you some of the things with host controls and the managed controls. What I want to show you now is, I think, two very, very cool features that are more based on making functionalities that exist in Office much easier to develop. And specifically, I'm talking about the Actions pane and Smart Text. So these aren't necessarily concepts that you'd know as a Visual Studio developer, but to build them, you are going to apply familiar Visual Studio paradigms as well.
Okay.
So let's start with the Actions pane. For those, do you know what the Actions pane is?
No, I don't.
Okay. So let me show you.
I'm a newbie to Office.
Okay. Let me just show you
I've been
here.
using it for 15 years, and I still don't know all the features.
So there's a task pane.
What's the old thing? Everybody uses 10% of the
20%
features.
of the features, right? They don't all use the same 20%.
That's right.
Right? That's the problem. So you have probably seen this thing called the task pane.
Yeah.
Right?
That's right.
So the task pane is something new that was in Office XP. And you'll see here the task pane had a number of different specific task panes that provided a surface area for UI specific to certain parts, for certain functionalities within Office. So do I have, my clipboard or my research pane? If I were in Word, you've probably seen how you would define your styles and formatting using the task pane. Or if you're in PowerPoint, which I spent a lot of time in PowerPoint, custom animation. That's all defined through the task pane. So those task panes are very interesting in that they bring the UI right into the document workspace where the user can see it. It's very evident to them. The nice thing is that in Office 2003, there's a new task pane called the Document Actions task pane that's available to document customizations. So now, document customizations have a surface area that they can customize and provide UI specific to that document type. And the way that Office does this is through something called the iSmart Document Interface. It's a COM interface that you implement to provide that customization. Now, it's quite a lot of effort to implement iSmart Document. You have to implement about 25 methods. There is no visual tool for laying out UI. You have a set of controls that you can use, and pretty much you write a schema and you associate controls based on where you are in a schema, but you do it all through text-based mechanism. VSTO has taken that has encapsulated that underlying implementation, and what it exposes to the developer is a Windows Forms-based programming model. So you don't have to know anything about iSmart Document. You don't even have to map a schema to the document to get an action to customize the Document Actions task pane. So the way that you would typically do this is using the Windows Forms custom user controls. So I'm going to add a new user control item to my project, and this serves as the panel or the container for me to lay out all of my controls. So what we'll do here is we'll go to our toolbox, and I'm just going to keep this simple because really, and this is Windows Forms programming. There's nothing new here that's been added by VSTO. So we have a button, and now there are new things that you need to know about the Actions pane from a Visual Studio perspective. One is, now that I have this user control, how do I associate that user control to the Actions pane? We're going to show you that. I'll show you that. So that's very simple. We're going to go here to the Workbook class, and one of the Visual Studio Tools for Office has exposed from the Workbook class and from the Document class in Word. I'll go through this so you can see the Actions pane class. So we have the Actions pane property here. It's has a collection of controls, and we're going to here. Let's see, where are we? I must have had a typo here. Actions pane dot controls. There we go. And our add method. And what we're going to add here is a new instance of the user control that we just defined. So we have a very similar model to a form as defined by Windows Forms. A form has a collection of controls, and you add controls to the collection. In this case, we're doing it here explicitly. So we've instantiated our user control and added it to the Actions pane. And that's it. That's all you have to know about how to get your user controls onto the Actions pane. That single line of code and that GUI definition we did with our user control replaces the hundreds of lines of code that you would have to do before to implement iSmart Document. So I think that's pretty cool. And the other thing that is of interest that you might not know as a Visual Studio developer is, if I'm in my user control, how do I talk to my document? How can I access the document directly from that user control? So if we go to our user control, I'm going to hook up the button here then, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to modify the value of our named range control that we previously defined. So VSTO provides a static class called Globals that allows me to navigate between the different elements of my Office solution, so the sheets and the workbook. If I were in Word, I would see this document here. So I'm going to Sheet 1, and we had our named range control here, and here we'll just hook up the value 2 property, and we'll just set this to something like, hello from the Actions pane. Okay. So let's run this. Now, a couple of things well, first of all, we'll see that the Document Actions pane, there we go. That's how easy it was to get that control posted there on the Document Actions task pane. And the interesting thing here is that once we have a custom user control, you can do anything on that Actions pane. All of the richness that Windows Forms provides, you can put tab controls, you can put the tool strip control, a browser control, all of those great controls that you have. There's no limit to what you can do in that Actions pane. Now I showed you before how we hooked up the button event handler. So let's just click on that. Notice that we've modified the contents of our named range, and that has invoked the named range change event. It's fired that event, and that's how we got our message box. So I did want to comment one thing. If we go back to our code here, I know that some people cringe when you see, oh, I'm referencing, this tight coupling you might have sometimes between a control and the document, and now I have this dependency on the document. What if I want to build a reusable control and use it across multiple solutions? That's just a matter of design. So here, instead of directly accessing the globals and accessing the document and known elements of the document, what I would do is I would define a control that here I would fire an event. And I would fire an event and then use that and hook up that event in my document class. So I could have this control in a separate DLL and a separate class library assembly and use that not only across multiple VSTO projects, but across WinForms projects as well. Because there doesn't have to necessarily be any dependency on Office or on VSTO in those user controls. It's about following the .NET class library, .NET class library guidelines, I guess it is, on how to implement appropriate eventing.
Right.
Yeah, sorry, I got a little stuck there. Okay. All right.
So much to know.
I know. So the actions pane, very cool. And the last thing I wanted to show you was for smart text, because then this is again is another feature provided by Office that is typically doesn't follow, was not designed to be implemented necessarily with Visual Studio or Visual Studio.NET. So the way that VSTO provides support for this, again, is we're going to create a new class. So we're just going to say add new class. And I'm just going to leave that class 1. And what we're going to do here is we're going to add a reference to the namespace that we need here. So Microsoft Office Tools Excel. And what we're going to do is we're going to inherit this class from the smart tag class that's provided by VSTO. Okay, so we have our smart tag class, and I need to lost my. Seem to have lost. There we go. Now we also, what we're going to have to do here is we're going to have to implement the default constructor. So we'll, class 1, and we're going to call the default constructor here, and we're going to pass in a URI that defines the smart tag. So we'll say, we'll just do something like schemas.microsoft. My typing's not very good this morning. I'll just do Cheller. VSTO, and we'll put in something like demo. Okay. And the other thing we need to do here is we're going to set the caption that's going to appear when it's recognized a tag, the caption that appears in the little drop-down menu. So we'll call that demo. Okay. And let's implement our constructor. So we're going to do a little bit of initialization here. First thing we're going to do is we're going to set the terms that we're going to recognize. So the smart tag base class provides a terms collection, and I'm going to add some terms. And I'm not going to be very creative here. I'm just going to use foo. But I just want you to see the mechanics on how easy this is. Foo bar. So we want to be able to, anytime that foo and bar appear on our spreadsheet, we want a little smart tag, and we want to be able to provide an action for it. So what's the action we want to provide? Well, we need to define an action class. So let's do action. We'll just call this my action. New action. And the caption we're going to have for this action is echo. What we're going to do is we're going to provide a command that just echoes the term that we've recognized. So kind of another variation here of message box. Now the my action class has an event, a click event, which we're going to hook up here as well, which is the event when the user selects the echo command. This is where we're going to put the code that we want to get executed. So we're going to hook up the click event here using the auto completion in Visual Studio. I just love that. Did you get that?
No.
Double tap. Should I do it again?
Oh yeah.
Oh, I love this. Okay, so let's hook up our event handler. Plus equals tab. There we go. That's cool.
Is that a snippet? Then
No, it's autocomplete. Oh, wow. So you hit tab and it will hit the it will new the event handler for you, and then it writes the actual.
Is that new in the Whitby?
I think it was in Everett.
It was,
yeah, I
okay.
think it was in Everett.
Still learning some of these new.
So anyway, now we have our click. What we're going to do here in the click event is use message box to do the echo. As you can tell, I love message box, right? Message box .show, and we have a e.text. E is the parameter that's being passed to our event handler, and it will pass us the text. In the text property, it's passing us the actual text that was recognized. And I need to add a declaration here as well because I didn't have the system dot Windows forms dot, there you go. Windows. Okay. So we have one last thing to do here, and we need to the smart tag actually has a collection of actions because I can have multiple actions available for my recognized tags. So what we're going to do here is we're just going to set up the actions collection, and we're just going to new up a new array of actions and initialize that. Oops, where am I? The touchpad here does some fun things, and we're going to add my action here, and there we go. Now we have one more thing we need to do. Now we've implemented our smart tag class. We need to add that smart tag class to a collection that's provided by VSTO. And again, we're going to go to our workbook class. And just before, as in before, we added controls to the action panes controls collection. We're going to add our smart tag class to the VSTO smart tags collection. Okay. So we add that, and we'll say new, and it was just called class 1. Okay. So, okay, any typos here, we'll see this come up. So let's enter one of our recognizable tags, or terms, and there you have it. It's recognizing foo, it's providing the smart tag menu, and here's the caption we gave to our smart tag class, and then here's the action that we added, which was the echo action. So we can select that, and there we get our foo. If we do it for bar, you'll see here that we'll echo the term that was passed in, which was the term that was recognized, which in this case is bar. So again, it's pretty cool.
Very cool. That has a lot of useful things that you can do.
Yep. So there are a lot of scenarios there where you could hook up recognizing the smart tags and then tie that into controls and information that's displayed on the actions pane. Again, you want to build these rich, smart client or smart documents, right? Smart document solutions.
Very cool. Wow.
So
anything else cool?
Some pretty neat stuff. And I think this is a good place to start. This is some of the again, there really aren't that many new concepts that I've shown you here from the perspective of a Visual Studio developer. A couple of new things about, yes, how do I hook up a user control to the actions pane? How do I implement a class to provide a smart tag implementation? But they're all following the familiar paradigms that you should know already from .NET development.
Right.
So that's pretty cool.
Where will developers hit walls with this? Where are you going to have to still drop down to some other methodology?
So I think whenever you're going to want to do really, really sophisticated UI, where you're going to want to provide fancy formatting, where you're going to want to really get in there and know the formulas that you're putting in, and you're going to need to drop down to the object models, because there isn't, and it wasn't the intent to provide a full wrapper or new programming model. You want to also keep in mind there's a roadmap going forward. Office will have new versions, and so we want to make sure that this keeps in line with what Office will provide in the future.
Right. And distribution, how would I get this on a user's machine now that we built a killer spreadsheet?
Okay, so a couple of things to note on distribution. One, I wanted to just make sure to everybody that it's not always obvious that VSTO is not included in all of the Visual Studio editions. So you might expect to find it in Professional or in Standard, but it's only available in the VSTS edition,
okay.
And in the standalone VSTO SKU the beta 2 will be available for that in about a month.
Okay.
Okay, so you need to have one of those two editions in order to get the VSTO support. Now, in order to deploy this to an end user machine, there are quite a number of things that have to be deployed. You have to deploy the .NET Framework 2.0. There is a VSTO runtime as well that you need to install on top of the .NET Framework. You have to have Office 2003 Professional Edition installed with the .NET programmability support enabled. Now, the good news is that there will be a separate redistributable of the Office PIAs that you'll be able to include in your installation packages as well, because it's been a little bit painful right now having to go and do an Office repair through the Office setups in order to, if you've installed the .NET Framework after installing Office, well then the Office PIAs don't get registered because there's no GAC, so it's kind of a catch-22 there.
Is there going to be a nice build kit so that you can, at the end of this, you can wrap it all up and send it to your friends?
Well, that's going to help a lot, because having the PIAs in their own redist, until now, the only supported way of installing Office was through the Office installation programs. And so now you'll be able to say, I'm going to redistribute the Office primary interop assemblies with my application, and then I can install them. So that's going to ease some of the pain. Now, there are a couple of other things that you need as well, and that's security. By default, in VSTO, no code runs. And I know that's a pretty harsh default, but it's very important.
Yeah.
Because documents are quite different in nature than applications, and users have different expectations of documents than they do with apps. You probably don't expect to take a WinForms app and email it to someone, or to make a copy of it, or
maybe me.
So we really want to be very careful that, and you're opening a document, you don't necessarily know that there's code behind. We don't want to put the decision in the end user. You don't enable macros, right? What are you supposed to say? Yes, I want to get my job done, or no? So so you have to deploy .NET Code Access Security Policy in order for your solution to run.
Okay.
Now, there are a number of ways that you can do that. Just you need to do those policies based on location other than zone. So it would be based on a URL, or based on a site, or based on on who is it from, what publisher, what certificate did you sign it with, or what strong name did you sign it with.
Right.
So you can use those as well.
Yeah. Eric Lippert, I think, talked to us about code access security.
Yeah, and it is a little. I mean, it is complicated. I think that at this stage, Eric's probably one of those 10 people on the planet who truly understand code access security.
So once you write an app and you get it deployed to your work group or to your company, how do you update it? How do you add new features to it and redeploy it?
Mm-hmm.
Is there a click once scenario, or how would you redeploy an app after you got 1,000 spreadsheets of Procter & Gamble or wherever that have this stuff?
So the good news is that the code is not deployed with your solution. So if you look at a model like VBA today, Visual Basic for Applications, the code travels along with the document, and so updating that is a nightmare. Where did that document get copied and saved to? You have three very distinct things here. You have the code, which is in a Visual Studio project, and that gets typically stored in a source code control system. The result of building that project is a managed assembly, a DLL assembly, and it's that assembly and its dependent assemblies that need to be deployed with the document. So the document has a link or a reference that allows it to find the location of that document. Basically, now you mentioned click once before, and this is something that earlier on in the cycle we had been referring to VSTO as having online click once deployment. We've decided not to use the term click once with VSTO for a number of reasons. The click once technology that's being developed by the Windows Forms and the Fusion team doesn't support DLLs. You have a managed executable as your entry point. And when you're talking about customizations, you're typically talking about DLLs that are in some host application that you have no control over. In this case, they happen to be native apps like Word and Excel. So while we do emulate some of the behavior of click once that allows you to have an application manifest and have this manifest-based deployment that allows you to have that extra level of indirection. You can point to a deploy manifest that then can point you to the updated versions. Calling it click once was causing a lot of confusion, because people have expectations for click once, like the fact that it will install locally and it will update automatically from that local install, and that it will work offline. And those are assumptions that aren't applicable to the manifest-based deployment that's provided by VSTO 2005. It's really no-touch deployment plus a manifest that provides that extra level of indirection. So I can deploy my assemblies. I can deploy them to a shared server. I can deploy them to an HTTP server. I can deploy them to a file share. And when I update my assemblies, I update that central location, then that's all I have to do to update my application. So there are some, it is easier to update and maintain than traditional VBA applications, right? So, but there are a number of things where it gets a little tricky, is if you want guaranteed offline support, then you need to start thinking about trade-offs there. Do I want to provide synchronized file or synchronized folders? Do I want to install locally and maybe give up some of that ease of maintenance in order to have a guaranteed offline support? There are some things you need to think about there.
Okay. And where do you recommend people go to learn about this? Is there a web address or?
Well, first of all, up in the MSDN Office Developer site, there's a great section on VSTO. So if you go to msdn.microsoft.com/office, there's an entry that says understanding different technology, understanding Visual Studio tools for Office, and you'll have links there. The product team has done an amazing job of having a lot of samples and white papers and things that are published there. So that's one location. And of course, the other location internally would be our evangelism site. So,
Right, for internal employees.
That's right.
I might put this out in the public. So
Okay, sure.
It's actually pretty interesting stuff. So thanks for spending 40 minutes with us showing us VSTO.
Sure. Thank you, Robert.
Thanks.